"Ma'am, can you show me where your association actually purchased this road?" The county official asked it so calmly that for half a second, nobody moved. Not Rebecca Whitmore. Not her attorney. Not the contractor standing beside a yellow excavator with its engine ticking in the cool Tennessee morning. Behind us, cars rolled slowly through Cedar Ridge Estate's main entrance, tires humming over pavement the HOA had treated like its own for years. Rebecca tightened both hands around her leather folder. 3 weeks earlier, she had stood on my property and told me I did not understand how access rights worked. Now a county surveyor was kneeling beside a weathered iron monument at the edge of that same entrance, brushing red clay away with his glove. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am 46 years old, and I have spent most of my working life around grading plans, drainage systems, property lines, and access roads. I know what survey monuments mean. I know what recorded easements mean. And I knew the moment that iron pin came out of the dirt that Rebecca had a much bigger problem than the 30 feet of my land she had been trying to take. She glanced toward me. Her expression had changed. That polished HOA president confidence was gone. "This is Cedar Ridge's entrance," she said. The official looked down at the documents in his hands. "That is not what I asked." The morning went quiet except for the low idle of the excavator and the distant hiss of sprinklers across the subdivision lawns. I could smell damp soil, diesel exhaust, and fresh coffee from the paper cup cooling beside my truck. Rebecca's attorney leaned toward her and whispered something. I could not hear the words, but I saw her jaw tighten. I did not smile. I did not need to. 3 weeks earlier, none of us had been standing here. There had not been county officials, attorneys, survey crews, or a line of nervous HOA board members staring at an old property marker like it had just crawled out of the ground. There had only been me, half awake at 6:18 on a Monday morning, standing in my kitchen when a metallic clang carried across my back field. Then another. Clang. Clang. I set down my coffee and walked outside. Morning fog still hung over the grass. About 200 yards from the house, 3 men in reflective vests were driving orange survey stakes into my pasture. Bright paint cut across the green grass in a straight line towards Cedar Ridge. I pulled on my boots and headed down the fence line. One stake stood less than 10 feet inside my property. Another carried a strip of fluorescent ribbon snapping in the breeze. Then I saw the temporary sign beside the survey truck, Cedar Ridge Estates, future secondary entrance. Rebecca stood beside it in a cream jacket, holding a clipboard like the decision had already been made. "Morning, Daniel," she said. I looked at the stakes, then at her. "You are surveying my property." She gave me that practiced smile I had seen at every HOA meeting I had ever bothered attending. "We are surveying the future access corridor. On my land." Her smile did not move. Not for much longer. I remember the exact sound the next hammer strike made behind her. Sharp. Metallic. Final. At the time, Rebecca thought she was marking where Cedar Ridge's second entrance would begin. What she did not know was that her survey crew had just given me a reason to start asking who really controlled the first one. That morning was the first time Rebecca had put stakes in my ground, but it was not the first time somebody had warned me to pay attention to where Cedar Ridge ended and my property began. I bought the 18 acres 7 years earlier from Harold Bennett, a 78-year-old cattleman with sun-cracked hands, faded work shirts, and the kind of patience you only get after spending half a century fixing fences nobody else notices. The property sat along the eastern edge of Cedar Ridge Estates, where neat half-acre lawns gave way to rolling pasture, cedar trees, and red Tennessee clay. My wife, Laura, fell in love with the place before we even reached the house. I fell in love with the workshop. It was a 40 by 60-foot steel building with enough room for my truck, my tools, and the old grading equipment I refused to sell after leaving full-time contracting. I had spent 23 years building access roads, shaping drainage swales, preparing commercial sites, and reading construction plans until contour lines made more sense to me than handwriting. I was not a surveyor or an attorney, but I knew one thing better than most homeowners. Lines on a map mattered. A 6-inch mistake on paper could become a 6-foot problem in the dirt. Harold understood that too. On closing day, he handed me a thick manila envelope stuffed with deeds, surveys, tax maps, and documents that looked older than I was. The paper smelled like dust and the inside of an old courthouse. I remember flipping through it at his kitchen table while a ceiling fan clicked overhead. Harold tapped the envelope with one crooked finger. Keep every page of that deed packet, he told me, especially the old ones. I asked him why. He looked through the window towards Cedar Ridge's main road, visible between two rows of maple trees. Developers remember what helps them, he said. Land remembers everything. At the time, I figured it was just an old farmer's way of talking. I put the packet inside a gray metal filing cabinet in my workshop and mostly forgot about it. Life got busy. Laura started managing the front office at a dental practice in town. I took smaller site consulting jobs and spent more evenings at home. Cedar Ridge kept growing. New roofs appeared beyond my western fence. Delivery trucks came and went. Every weekday around 7:30 in the morning, I could hear tires rolling through the subdivision's main entrance while I drank coffee on our back porch. It became background noise, as ordinary as cicadas in July. My relationship with the neighborhood was simple because I was not part of it. My parcel had never been included in the homeowners association. I paid county taxes, maintained my own fence, cleared my own drainage, and kept my gravel drive in good shape. Nobody bothered me, and I bothered nobody. Then Rebecca Whitmore became association president. The first time she visited, she did not bring survey stakes or an attorney. She brought a folder, a smile, and what she called a reasonable proposal. Cedar Ridge, she explained, had grown to 146 homes, all feeding through one entrance. The board wanted a second access point for emergency vehicles and traffic relief. She opened a glossy site plan across my workbench and traced a manicured finger over the eastern boundary. "We only need 30 feet, she said. I studied the line. It crossed my pasture, clipped my fence, and connected directly to a county road on the other side. "No," I said. Rebecca blinked like she had expected a number, not an answer. Then she smiled again. "Daniel, everything has a price." I folded the plan and slid it back toward her. "My land does not." That was when her smile changed. Rebecca left my workshop without raising her voice, which somehow bothered me more than if she had slammed the door. Her boots clicked across the concrete, slow and measured, while the sweet floral scent of her perfume lingered behind her. At the doorway, she stopped and looked back at the site plan in my hands. "You should think about what is best for the community," she said. I leaned against the workbench. "I am thinking about what is best for my property." Her expression stayed pleasant, but the warmth disappeared from it. "Those two things do not have to be different." Then she walked to her white sport utility vehicle and drove away. For 4 days, nothing happened. Friday afternoon, a certified envelope arrived. The paper inside was thick, bright white, and covered with language designed to make a simple land grab sound like public service. Cedar Ridge needed emergency access. Cedar Ridge needed traffic relief. Cedar Ridge needed a secondary evacuation route. Buried near the bottom was a proposal offering me $12,000 for a permanent access easement across the eastern edge of my pasture. I read it twice. 30 feet had quietly become 40. The route had shifted north and now crossed a drainage swale I had spent years maintaining. Worse, the drawing showed grading beyond the proposed easement, enough room for utility work, shoulders, and a turning radius. They were asking for 40 feet while planning to disturb almost 60. I called Rebecca. "Your map changed." There was a pause. I could hear voices and silverware behind her, like she was sitting in a restaurant. "Engineering requirements evolve, Daniel. My property line does not." Her voice cooled. "You are focusing on technicalities." That almost made me laugh. Technicalities were how roads stayed on the land they belonged to. I declined the offer in writing. The following Tuesday, another letter arrived, this one from an attorney representing the association. It mentioned public necessity, emergency planning, historical access considerations, and possible legal remedies if voluntary cooperation failed. None of it actually said they owned anything. That mattered. People trying to intimidate you love verbs like require, compel, enforce, and demand. I had spent enough years reading contracts to notice when the nouns underneath those verbs were missing. Laura found me at the kitchen table that evening with both letters spread beside my coffee. Rain tapped softly against the windows. "Are they threatening to take it?" she asked. "They are threatening to make me believe they can." 2 days later, I discovered how far Rebecca intended to push that strategy. Cedar Ridge held its monthly association meeting in the clubhouse. I was not a member, but Rebecca had invited me to discuss community access. When I walked inside, nearly 40 residents were already seated beneath fluorescent lights. A large map stood on an easel at the front. My pasture was shaded pale yellow. Across it ran a clean black road labeled Mercer Drive Extension. I stopped walking. Nobody had asked permission to name a road across my land. Rebecca stood beside the map in a navy blazer, speaking about emergency response times and neighborhood safety. Then she saw me. "Daniel, thank you for coming." Every face turned toward me. She pointed at the yellow corridor. "This is the most practical solution for everyone." I looked at the map, then at her. "Everyone except the person who owns it." A few chairs creaked. Rebecca clasped her hands. "Property ownership comes with responsibilities. So does association leadership." Her smile tightened. That was the moment I understood the meeting was never meant to negotiate with me. It was meant to put 40 witnesses in a room and make my refusal look unreasonable. By the time I drove home, the rain had stopped. My headlights swept across the pasture fence as I turned onto my gravel drive. Near the eastern corner, something orange flashed in the darkness. I slowed down. A strip of survey ribbon had been tied to one of my fence posts. The ribbon was not there by accident. I parked beside the fence and stepped out into air that still smelled like wet grass and rain-soaked cedar. My headlights caught another orange strip 20 yards farther north, then another beyond it. Somebody had marked a line across my property after I had already said no. I took photographs before touching anything. The next morning, I walked the entire eastern boundary with my phone and a tape measure. 7 ribbons, 3 wooden stakes, 1 patch of orange paint near the drainage swale. I photographed every one, measured their distance from the fence, and saved the images with the date and time. Years in construction had taught me something simple. Arguments disappear. Records do not. By noon, Rebecca had already started building a different kind of record. A post appeared on the Cedar Ridge community page explaining that one neighboring landowner was refusing to cooperate with an emergency access project intended to protect 146 families. She never used my name. She did not need to. Everyone knew whose pasture sat between Cedar Ridge and the county road. The comments started almost immediately. People asked about fire trucks, school buses, storm evacuation. One resident wondered why a single property owner should be allowed to interfere with public safety. Rebecca answered with polished little sentences about patience, responsibility, and exhausting every reasonable option. I could almost hear her voice through the screen. Laura read the post over my shoulder. "She is making you the problem. That is the idea." Monday brought another certified letter. Tuesday brought a telephone call from an engineering consultant asking when his crew could inspect the proposed corridor. I told him they could not enter my property without written permission. Wednesday morning, I heard a gasoline-powered brush cutter near the fence. By the time I reached the pasture, 2 workers had cleared a narrow section of weeds and removed 1 loose fence panel. Rebecca stood beside their pickup with her clipboard tucked against her chest. "Stop the work," I said. The engine went quiet. Suddenly, I could hear birds in the tree line and the faint rush of traffic from Cedar Ridge's main entrance. Rebecca looked almost annoyed that I had interrupted something routine. "This is preliminary site preparation. This is private property. Our council believes the association has historical access rights through this area." "Then show me the recorded document." She hesitated for half a second. That was enough. "Daniel, you are not an attorney." "No, I am the landowner." One of the workers looked down at his boots. Rebecca lowered her voice. "If you continue obstructing this project, the association will pursue every remedy available." I looked at the missing fence panel, then at the orange paint cutting through my grass. "Put the fence back." Her jaw tightened. "You are making this much harder than it needs to be." "For who?" She did not answer. The crew packed up, but Rebecca left the fence panel on the ground. I restored it myself that afternoon, driving the fasteners back into place while the smell of cut weeds hung in the sun. Then I installed 2 small security cameras facing the corridor and saved copies of every letter, photograph, and message in a folder on my computer. That evening, Laura handed me my coffee and watched me label the files. "What happens now?" I looked through the workshop window toward the subdivision. Headlights were flowing through the main entrance in a steady line. Now I find out what they actually own. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. A clerk pulled up the current subdivision plat and rotated the monitor toward me. The map showed Cedar Ridge exactly as Rebecca had presented it, including a proposed access corridor near my boundary. For the first time since this started, my stomach tightened. On paper, Their position looked stronger than I expected. The clerk zoomed in until property lines filled the screen in thin black strokes. Cedar Ridge looked clean and official, every lot numbered, every street named, every drainage area carefully marked. Along my eastern boundary sat the same future access corridor Rebecca had shown at the clubhouse. Seeing it inside a county database gave it weight that a glossy presentation never could. When was this added? I asked. The clerk checked the filing history. This version was recorded about 14 months ago. 14 months. Rebecca had been planning that road long before she walked into my workshop pretending she had just come up with a reasonable proposal. I asked for certified copies of the plat, the filing history, and every document connected to the corridor. The printer hummed behind the counter. Warm paper slid into a tray carrying enough stamps and numbers to make anyone without construction experience want to surrender. I did not surrender, but I did leave worried. That afternoon, I called a real estate attorney named Aaron Price. I had worked around him years earlier on a commercial grading dispute. He listened, asked for the documents, then spent nearly 20 minutes reading without saying much. Finally, he leaned back. Their claim is not as ridiculous as you want it to be. That sentence landed hard. Aaron explained that the recorded plat created questions we would have to untangle before challenging anything. It did not automatically give Cedar Ridge my land, but fighting the issue could mean surveys, title research, hearings, and legal bills that climbed quickly. Rebecca did not need to be completely right. She only needed to make resisting expensive enough that $12,000 started looking attractive. I drove home with the certified documents on the passenger seat. The sky had turned gray, and the first drops of rain clicked against my windshield. At the Cedar Ridge entrance, 3 vehicles waited to turn onto the county road. I sat behind them longer than usual, staring at the stone columns, landscaped beds, and polished sign Rebecca treated like the front gate of her kingdom. Something about the geometry bothered me. The road seemed slightly offset from the subdivision boundary shown on the newer plat. It was not dramatic. Maybe 20 feet, maybe less. But after 23 years around site plans, small misalignments have a way of scratching at the back of your mind. That night, I spread the county copies across my kitchen table. Laura went to bed around 11. I stayed there with a ruler, a yellow legal pad, and coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. At 12:30, I finally gave up and walked into the workshop. Rain drummed softly against the metal roof. I opened the gray filing cabinet and started pulling folders. Tax records, closing papers, soil reports. Then my fingers touched the thick manila envelope Harold Bennett had handed me 7 years earlier. The paper had softened at the edges with age. I carried it to the workbench and switched on the overhead light. Halfway through the packet, I found an old survey dated 1986. The lines were faded, but the measurements were readable. My eyes followed the western boundary towards Cedar Ridge. Then I saw a narrow rectangular parcel extending beneath the subdivision entrance road. Parcel 17B. I checked the legal description. Then I checked it again. The parcel was tied to Harold's original tract. I pulled out my closing deed and felt my pulse change. Parcel 17B had transferred with the rest of the property. I grabbed the newer county plat and laid both maps side by side. The subdivision entrance crossed the same strip. For 7 years, I had been listening to traffic roll across a piece of land I apparently owned. And buried behind the old survey was one more document, folded into thirds, with a typed heading that made me stop breathing for a second. Access Easement Agreement. I read the easement agreement standing under the cold fluorescent lights of my workshop, with rain ticking against the roof and the old survey spread beneath my hands. The document had been signed in 1987, 1 year after the survey. Harold Bennett had granted the original Cedar Ridge developer permission to use Parcel 17B as the subdivision's primary entrance. Permission, not ownership. The distinction was sitting right there in faded black type. The developer could build and maintain a roadway across the parcel for residential access, but the underlying land remained part of Harold's tract. When Harold sold the property to me, that ownership came with it. I reached for my phone and called Aaron even though it was after midnight. He answered on the 4th ring. Daniel, somebody better be building a highway through your bedroom. I found the entrance. Silence. What entrance? Their entrance. By 9 the next morning, Aaron was sitting across from me with the old agreement inside a clear document sleeve. Beside him was Ethan Cole, a licensed surveyor I had known since my contracting days. Ethan studied the 1986 survey, then the modern plat, then my deed. His pencil stopped moving. I need to verify this in the field, he said. But these descriptions line up. Aaron was more cautious. He pointed to several paragraphs in the agreement. The easement allowed access for the original residential development, but it also contained restrictions on expansion, modification, and additional access connections involving the grantor's remaining property. Any substantial change required written consent from the landowner. I looked at him. They are trying to create another connection through the remaining property. That is what their plan shows. Without my consent. Aaron nodded. Which means Rebecca may have created a serious easement dispute while trying to create a second road. I wanted to call her immediately. Aaron stopped me. Do not tell her what you found yet. That was difficult. Rebecca had spent weeks talking to me like I was a stubborn obstacle who did not understand paperwork. Now I had paperwork she apparently had never bothered to read. But Aaron was right. We needed facts, not satisfaction. Ethan returned 2 days later with survey equipment and spent nearly 6 hours working around the entrance and my boundary. I watched from my truck as morning traffic passed within feet of him. Nobody gave him a second glance. Late that afternoon, he walked into my workshop carrying a rolled survey. Parcel 17B is yours, he said. He laid the drawing flat. The main entrance pavement crossed it almost exactly where the old map showed. The stone, landscaping on one side, even extended beyond the easement width. I stared at the measurements. Rebecca had accused me of standing between Cedar Ridge and access, while Cedar Ridge had been driving across my land every day. Aaron ordered a full title search. I organized everything else. Photographs of the orange stakes, the removed fence panel, certified letters, Rebecca's community post, the engineering proposal, the newer plat. I created folders by date and backed every file up twice. Then I stopped arguing. When Rebecca emailed demanding confirmation that her engineers could return, I answered with one sentence. Please provide the recorded instrument establishing your claimed access rights across my eastern pasture. She replied the next morning with 3 paragraphs about association authority and community necessity, but no recorded instrument. 2 days later, another message arrived. This one ended with a sentence I read twice. Cedar Ridge Estates controls all neighborhood access points and will proceed accordingly. I forwarded it to Aaron. His response came less than a minute later. Save that. I already had. Rebecca thought my silence meant I was finally giving up. In reality, for the first time since those orange ribbons appeared on my fence, I was done defending myself. I was documenting her. Rebecca made her next move on Thursday morning, and by then I had learned that her confidence always arrived before the paperwork. At 7:12, one of my security cameras sent an alert to my phone. A white utility pickup was parked beside the eastern fence. Behind it sat a compact excavator on a trailer, an engineering van, and Rebecca's white sport utility vehicle. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when Laura looked at my screen and said, "They came back." I was already reaching for my boots. By the time I crossed the pasture, 2 contractors were unloading equipment while another man photographed the orange stakes. Rebecca stood near the fence with a rolled construction plan under one arm. "Nobody has permission to work here," I said. She barely looked up. "The association has authorized preliminary grading." "On whose property?" That got her. "Attention. We have already discussed this, Daniel." "No. You have repeatedly announced what you intend to do." "That is not the same thing." I took out my phone and photographed the vehicles, license plates, equipment, and workers. Rebecca watched me with a thin smile. "You really think taking pictures changes anything?" "I think records matter." She gave a small sigh, like I was a difficult customer holding up a checkout line. "Our attorney is prepared to defend the association's access rights." "Good." I stepped back from the fence. Then he should enjoy the paperwork. What she did not know was that Aaron had sent a formal cease and desist notice the previous afternoon. Delivery confirmation showed it had reached the association office at 4:38. Rebecca had received written notice before bringing equipment back onto my land. That changed the shape of everything. I did not touch their machines. I did not block the road. I simply recorded what happened. One contractor removed the fence panel again. Another marked the proposed grading limits with orange paint. Then the excavator rolled off its trailer and stopped just inside my boundary. 20 minutes later, Aaron called. "Do you have video?" 2 cameras, and my phone. Keep recording. By 10 o'clock, the crew had left. Rebecca stayed long enough to hand me another envelope. Final notice, she said. You can still cooperate before this becomes expensive. I looked at the envelope but did not open it. For which one of us? Her eyes narrowed. She walked away without answering. That afternoon, Aaron's title researcher called with the confirmation we had been waiting for. Parcel 17B had never been conveyed to Cedar Ridge, its developer, or the association. The entrance easement remained tied to my underlying ownership, and the old agreement contained the same limitation Ethan and Aaron had identified. Changes involving additional connections through the remaining tract required written consent. There was more. The researcher had found planning documents for a proposed 42-home expansion north of Cedar Ridge. The second entrance was not simply about emergency response. It would improve access for the expansion Rebecca had been promoting privately to developers. Suddenly, the pressure campaign made sense. My pasture was not an inconvenience. It was part of somebody's development math. The next morning, Rebecca sent one more email. She wrote that Cedar Ridge controlled all existing and future neighborhood access points, and that contractors would resume work Monday. I forwarded it to Aaron. He called immediately. Do not respond. Why? Papers shifted on his end. Because the county has agreed to inspect the disputed corridor Monday morning, and I requested that they review the original entrance at the same time. I looked through the workshop window toward Cedar Ridge. Cars were flowing through that entrance exactly as they had every morning for 7 years. Does Rebecca know? I asked. Aaron paused. She knows there is an inspection. Does she know which entrance? Not yet. For the first time in 3 weeks, I closed the file cabinet before sunset and went inside for dinner. Monday morning arrived cold, bright, and almost painfully ordinary. At 6:45, I parked my truck near the eastern pasture with a thermos of coffee and watched mist lift off the grass. The orange stakes Rebecca had planted 3 weeks earlier were still there, glowing against the green like warning lights. At 6:58, her white sport utility vehicle turned onto the shoulder. An engineering van followed, then the contractor's pickup with the compact excavator behind it. Rebecca stepped out wearing a charcoal coat and carrying the same leather folder she always carried when she expected somebody else to surrender. I'm glad you decided to be here, she said. So am I. She glanced toward my pasture. Once the county confirms the corridor, we can finally move forward. I took a sip of coffee. We will see what they confirm. At 7:03, a county vehicle arrived, followed by Aaron and Ethan. That was when Rebecca's expression shifted. She had expected an inspector. She had not expected my attorney and surveyor. The county official introduced himself, reviewed the proposed corridor, and asked the contractor to keep all equipment outside my boundary until the ownership issue was resolved. Rebecca immediately opened her folder. The association has historical access rights, she said. Aaron spoke before I could. Then we should review the historical access documents. We did not walk toward the orange stakes. We walked toward Cedar Ridge's main entrance. Rebecca stopped. Why are we going over there? Nobody answered. Morning traffic moved past us in a steady stream. Tires whispered over asphalt. Sprinklers clicked across the landscaped median. Ethan walked to the edge of the road, found the spot he had marked during his survey, and scraped away loose soil with his boot. Beneath it sat the old iron monument from the 1986 survey. The county official compared Ethan's measurements with the certified deed and easement agreement. Then he looked at Rebecca. Ma'am, can you show me where your association actually purchased this road? There it was. The exact question I had heard in my head for days. Rebecca opened her folder. She pulled out the modern subdivision plat, then another document, then the engineering plan. Paper moved faster between her hands. This is Cedar Ridge's entrance. That is not what I asked, the official said. Aaron handed him the certified title record. Parcel 17B remains under Mr. Mercer's ownership, subject to the recorded access easement. Rebecca's attorney had arrived by then. He read the easement once, then again much more slowly. The color drained from Rebecca's face. I could smell diesel from the idling contractor truck and fresh mulch from the entrance beds. Everything felt strangely quiet. Aaron pointed to the restriction requiring the landowner's written consent for substantial modifications involving additional connections through the remaining tract. Your association is attempting exactly that, he said. Rebecca turned toward me. You cannot close the entrance to 146 homes. I never said I would. That mattered. I was not interested in punishing families who had nothing to do with her decisions. The county official issued a stop work order for the proposed corridor pending resolution of the property and easement dispute. Then he explained that Cedar Ridge's existing access arrangement would also require formal review because the association had represented itself as controlling property it did not own while pursuing an expansion beyond the recorded terms. Rebecca stared at the orange stakes across my pasture. 3 weeks earlier, those stakes had been symbols of certainty. Now they marked a project nobody was allowed to touch. Her attorney leaned close and whispered to her. She finally looked at me. "What do you want?" I handed Aaron my coffee, took the proposed access agreement from his folder, and held it out to her. "You wanted access," I said. "Now we can talk about access." Rebecca did not sign anything that morning. People like her rarely surrender while witnesses are still watching. She took the proposed agreement, climbed into her white sport utility vehicle, and left without another word. The contractor loaded the excavator back onto its trailer. The metallic clank of the ramps folding shut sounded better than any argument I could have made. But the county inspection was only the beginning. Cedar Ridge's attorney contacted Aaron 4 days later and confirmed that the association was withdrawing its claim to the second access corridor. No grading, no road, no permanent easement across my pasture. The association would restore the fence, remove every survey stake, repair the disturbed ground, and reimburse the survey expenses directly connected to correcting the boundary dispute. That solved my side of the property line. It did not solve theirs. Parcel 17B still belonged to me. Cedar Ridge's right to cross it came from the 1987 easement, not ownership, and Rebecca had repeatedly represented that right is broader than the document actually allowed. Aaron's position was simple. Residents would continue using the entrance. I had no interest in trapping 146 families behind a property dispute they had not created. But the association would correct its records, acknowledge the underlying ownership, and stop treating the existing access corridor like unrestricted HOA property. Any future widening, additional connection, substantial modification, or project affecting my remaining land would require the review and consent described in the recorded agreement. Rebecca's attorney did not like it. Aaron did not care whether he liked it. Documents do not become less accurate because they are inconvenient. A special Cedar Ridge board meeting was scheduled the following week. I did not attend. Laura asked why. "Because this is not about watching Rebecca lose a chair," I told her. "It is about keeping the road off our pasture." Harold called me that evening. One of his former neighbors had attended. The clubhouse had been packed. Residents had asked why money had been spent on survey crews and contractors before the association had verified its property rights. They asked why the second entrance had been described as an emergency necessity when documents showed it would also serve a planned 42-home expansion. Most of all, they wanted to know why Rebecca had repeatedly told them Cedar Ridge controlled all neighborhood access points when the main entrance itself crossed privately owned land under a limited easement. The board removed her as president pending a membership vote. Before the vote happened, Rebecca resigned. Harold delivered the news in the same calm voice he used to describe cattle prices. Turns out people get interested in deeds when you tell them the road under their tires might not belong to who they thought. I laughed. "You could have warned me 7 years ago." I did. That shut me up. By the following month, the orange stakes began disappearing. One by one, the fluorescent ribbons vanished from the pasture. A contractor returned, but this time he carried Ethan's certified survey instead of Rebecca's site plan. The compact excavator came back too. Only now its bucket filled the shallow grading cuts it had started instead of opening a roadway. Fresh soil went back into the disturbed ground. The removed fence panel was restored. Yellow paint disappeared from the trees. Laura stood beside me holding coffee while the final truck backed away. Beep, beep, beep. The same sound that had marked the beginning of the fight faded toward the county road. "That sounds better," she said. She was right. Silence sounds different after somebody tries to take it from you. The paperwork over the main entrance took longer. Months, not days. That was how real property issues worked. Title companies reviewed old transfers. Attorneys compared the 1987 easement with later plats. Maintenance responsibilities had to be clarified. Drainage language had to be updated. The association had spent years maintaining the pavement, But maintenance was not ownership. Use was not ownership. A stone sign with Cedar Ridge Estates carved into it was not ownership either. Eventually, Cedar Ridge and I signed updated documentation acknowledging exactly what existed. Parcel 17B remained part of my property. The association retained defined roadway access for the existing subdivision. Maintenance and drainage responsibilities were written clearly. The limits on expansion and additional connections were spelled out so nobody could reinterpret them 20 years later because a new board president wanted another road. The proposed corridor across my pasture disappeared from the revised development plans. The 42-home expansion had to find another access solution. That was not my problem. On the afternoon the final documents were recorded, Harold drove over in an old pickup that sounded like it had been negotiating with retirement for a decade. We walked toward the eastern fence under a clear Tennessee sky. Grass had already begun covering the disturbed ground. Near the drainage swale, I spotted one forgotten orange survey stake half buried in the soil. Its fluorescent ribbon was dirty and faded from rain. I pulled it out and turned it between my fingers. Harold smiled. Keeping a souvenir? Absolutely not. I tossed it into the truck bed. I have enough paperwork. He laughed. Then he walked toward one of the original boundary monuments and tapped it with his boot. Remember what I told you? Land remembers everything. That too. He looked toward Cedar Ridge. Through the trees, we could see cars moving beneath the stone entrance columns. Never assume a road belongs to the people driving on it. I finally understood why he had said it. A few weeks later, I had a consulting job inside Cedar Ridge. It was the first time I had driven through the main entrance since the dispute ended. I slowed as I approached the stone columns. Nothing dramatic had changed. Cars moved normally. A school bus waited near the curb. A delivery truck turned toward Hawthorne Court. Someone had replanted flowers beside the entrance sign. Near the edge of the road stood a small, plain marker acknowledging recorded access across private property. No giant warning. No chain. No barricade. No sign with my name in 6-inch letters. Just accurate language in the correct place. That was enough. I drove over parcel 17B and listened to the tires make the same soft hum I had heard from my porch for 7 years. The road had not changed. My understanding of it had. Rebecca had come to my workshop asking for 30 feet. Then 30 became 40. 40 became almost 60 feet of construction disturbance. When money failed, she used letters. When letters failed, she used community pressure. When that failed, she used survey stakes and contractors. She believed enough confidence could make a map more important than the deed beneath it. But every time she pushed farther into my pasture, she gave me another reason to open Harold's old envelope. If Rebecca had accepted my first no, I might never have looked. I might have spent another 20 years listening to cars roll over parcel 17B without ever thinking about who owned the soil beneath the asphalt. That was the irony she never saw coming. She wanted another way into Cedar Ridge. Instead, she forced everyone to examine the way they already had. When I got home that evening, Laura was sitting on the back porch with 2 cups of coffee. The late sunlight stretched across the pasture. The cedar fence stood straight along the eastern boundary. The oak trees Rebecca's engineers had marked were throwing long shadows across grass that had almost completely healed. I sat beside Laura and looked toward the subdivision. Quiet, she said. Finally, I nodded. Somewhere beyond the tree line, cars continued moving through Cedar Ridge's entrance. Nobody was stranded. Nobody had lost access to a home. That mattered. There was a version of this story where I could have turned parcel 17B into a weapon. Rebecca had certainly given me enough reasons to be angry. She had entered my property after being told no. She had allowed contractors to remove fencing. She had tried to make neighbors believe I was threatening public safety. She had pushed an expansion plan while presenting access rights far more broadly than the documents supported. But 146 families had not done those things. Taking revenge on them would not have protected my property. It would only have proved that I had learned the wrong lesson from Rebecca. I never needed to close their entrance. I only needed them to stop pretending they could take mine. Laura handed me a cup. You know the strangest part? She asked. What? The whole thing started with orange ribbon. I looked toward the pasture. No. It started with Rebecca thinking I would not read the paperwork. Laura smiled. She was right about one thing. The most important moments had been small. A survey ribbon tied to a fence. A parcel number printed in the corner of a map. An old man telling me to keep every page. A faded access easement agreement folded into thirds. An iron monument buried beneath red clay. None of those things looked powerful when I first saw them. The excavator looked powerful. The HOA letterhead looked powerful. Rebecca standing beside a road map and telling 40 homeowners that I was standing in their way looked powerful. But power and authority are not the same thing. Authority comes from what the documents actually allow, not from how confidently somebody describes them. I thought about the county official brushing dirt off that old survey monument. "Ma'am, can you show me where your association actually purchased this road?" Rebecca had answered, "This is Cedar Ridge's entrance." And the official had given her the only response that mattered. "That is not what I asked." That was the entire story in 6 words. Rebecca kept answering questions nobody had asked. Was a second entrance useful? Probably. Would it improve traffic? Maybe. Did 146 families want it? Some of them certainly did. None of those answers changed the question underneath everything. Whose land was it? She came looking for 30 feet of my pasture and kept pushing until the records led straight back to parcel 17B. She wanted another way into Cedar Ridge and ended up proving that the way they already used was never theirs to control without limits. Justice was not a locked gate. It was not an excavator being seized. It was not watching families line up on the road because I decided to make them pay for Rebecca's mistake. Justice was quieter. It was a faded deed, an old easement, an iron survey marker, and a boundary somebody finally bothered to read. If this story had you rooting for Daniel, hit the like button and share this video with someone who believes property rights should still mean something when an HOA crosses the line. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about ordinary homeowners who refuse to be intimidated when somebody tries to take control of what legally belongs to them. And before you go, leave a comment below and tell me this. What would you have done if an HOA sent contractors onto your land, started marking out a road, and then you discovered their only entrance crossed property you owned? I read the comments, and I would love to hear what you think. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for supporting the channel, and I will see you in the next story.